Welcome to Accreditation Conversations. I'm your host, Amy Dykins from Weave, and today I'm going to be speaking with Leah Matthews. She currently serves as the Executive Director of the Distance Education Accrediting Commission. They're located in Washington, D.C., and are a private nonprofit organization that was founded in 1926. I was surprised that a distance education accrediting organization had been around for so long, and Leah talks about that a little bit today in our episode. She is a pleasure to speak with about accreditation because she has such a wealth of knowledge. She has a background having served not only with CHIA in the past, but she was also selected as a member of the U.S. Department of Education's 2019 Distance Education and Innovation Committee. And truly, her organization is working on innovation in higher education in many ways, and she provides leadership not only to that organization, but also is involved in NC-SARA, which we'll talk about in the episode. You'll learn more about what that organization does, as well as serving as Vice President of the Board of Directors for the International Network for Quality Assurance Agencies in Higher Education. So really, Leah has dedicated her career to work in quality in higher education. And she has some resources to share with us, as well as some great advice and insights. So let's get started. Good morning and welcome to the podcast, Leah. Thank you so much for joining me today. As we get started, I think it would be very interesting for our listeners to learn a little bit more about your organization, DEAC. It has kind of a unique role in this space. And so I would like for you to kind of give them some context and help them understand a little bit more about DEAC.
Thank you, Amy, for having me today. I'm always happy with the opportunity to talk about the Distance Education Accrediting Commission and its work in quality assurance for online learning and distance education programs. DEAC is in its 96th year of operating as a quality assurance body for distance education. It was founded, first of all, to review correspondence courses, which was the way distance education was framed in its early stages. Now DEAC accredits fully online university systems, and it also still works with institutions that have a correspondence course model for those learners that still prefer to do their scholarly work and their studies in that kind of learning model. DEAC accredits about 100 institutions that offer all kinds of educational programs, from certificates and diplomas all the way up to professional doctoral degrees. Most of our institutions, Amy, operate in highly specialized areas and graduate programs. And so if you have an interest in a specialized subject area, such as maybe a business law or dentistry science, drone technology and management, there's a lot of variety to the program offerings across DEAC institutions.
Excellent. And you know what? I completely would not have had any idea that your organization was one that had been established so long ago, right? When I was looking at some of your history, it's so interesting to think about this as kind of the framework of where distance education started and has grown into what we think about today using the technology that's available to us today. So very interesting background coming to what is now a very hot topic in higher education. For very obvious reasons. But I also was surprised when we spoke the other day to learn about all of the different types of programs, and you just introduced a few of them. Can you say just a little bit more about some of the variety of programs that you accredit and why you have such a wide variety of programs?
Education technologies has made learning across all different kinds of subject areas and professions possible in ways even a couple of years ago we didn't imagine could be possible. One field that is experiencing tremendous growth in online learning is the nursing field. where nurses are able to work online in their courses and then go to labs associated with hospitals and care centers to do their practica. So distance education has been able to provide the workforce with much needed advances in nursing training and bringing nurses into the field. There's other areas that have worked in distance education that you may not expect. Take physical therapy. Again, that's a very hands-on type of profession. Again, many institutions have looked to coursework being delivered online and then in a practical setting, working on those competencies in person. The last types of programs that are growing in interest is online high schools, where individuals can finish their high school credential in an online learning setting if they didn't complete it in those years of 15 to 18 years old. There's many distance education opportunities to finish a high school credential, and we've seen the most success in online learning with graduate studies, working professionals that want to complete a master's degree for advancement and furthering their own work and development in their chosen profession.
That makes a lot of sense, that thinking about folks who are already in the workforce but wanting to continue their education. I mean, actually, I was somebody who was in the workforce and went back to school, and this is in a premier program that was 10 years ago, that was an online program through the University of Colorado Springs.
Right.
Again, I couldn't have done that. I couldn't have had a family and been in my career and also continued my career if that hadn't been an opportunity that I was able to take advantage of. So that makes a lot of
You know,
sense.
the growing acceptance of distance education is really helping to expand options for learners, especially in this working professional space. I mean, it's always been attractive to the working professional, but because there is increasing acceptance of earning an online degree, that just expands opportunity and access. And that's what distance education should be about, is about what is the best opportunity we can afford the learner in their setting and at their level of readiness to learn via distance education.
Excellent. And so you actually are bringing up a topic that I knew we wanted to discuss.
Right.
And that has to do with thinking about the quality of distance education programs and the acceptance of those programs. And I know you have some really strong thinking about this and how it impacts students. Can you say a little bit about that for our listeners?
Sure. The quality review process for any distance education course or program has to take place in varying stages because you want to test the consistency of that quality. You want to look at an online content and the manner it's being delivered more than just once. At DEAC, we have these longstanding practices of having specialists in subject areas who are also trained in online learning to look at online content in the learning management system to evaluate how students are being assessed in their competencies towards those learning outcomes. And it builds this picture of education quality and any questions that need answered. For example, how effective is the faculty member in the online learning environment? How are they going about their delivery of their content? How are they evaluating the students in achieving the learning outcomes? And how does this map to other courses within that online learning program, and ultimately, the goal of the program and its graduation rates, and then the success of the student after they complete that online program. That process, Amy, can take several months. And DEAC has some really terrific partners that work with institutions on developing their proficiencies in online learning and producing that evidence. I would also suggest that there are so many good resources now for developing internal assessment of quality review. You don't need your accreditor to do this for you. In fact, you shouldn't wait for your accreditor to start looking at education quality. Get involved with organizations like the WICHE Education and Training Consortium, WCET. Get involved with Quality Matters, which has a terrific development program for faculty and internal evaluators within an institution. UPSEA, the Online Learning Consortium, EDUCAUSE, all of these organizations can support an institution along the way to developing education quality and then evaluating the effectiveness of their education program.
Nice. Those are wonderful resources, and we'll make sure we call those out for folks so that they can find them really
Absolutely.
easily.
Right.
And so thinking about, again, before we move on from that idea of DEAC being, you're in a little bit of a unique role in accreditation today. And recently we've had some changes at the federal level that we're starting to see some of the impact of changing thinking about regional accreditors versus national accreditors, institutional accreditors. You accredit programs and institutions, is that correct? Okay. And so then as these changes have rolled out, how have they impacted you and your organization and the folks that you're working with?
Right. In the prior administration, they held a process that's called negotiated rulemaking, which brings together various members of the education community to talk about how accreditors engage in their very important role of gatekeeping for federal financial aid. And so for your listeners that may not be as familiar with this process, each accrediting organization is recognized by the Department of Education through a kind of a quasi-accreditation process of the accreditor. And there are published rules around that process that get reviewed and negotiated for change. And so that process took place in 2019, and many rules were implemented and effective July 1, 2020, and again in July of 2021. So for accreditation, we really are being held increasingly accountable to outcomes at our institutions, to the rate of student success and achievement, and the quality and value of that student experience is also, being raised for what accreditation is doing as part of its role in oversight, supervision, quality assurance, and the gatekeeper for federal financial aid that, you know, can balloon into student loan debt. And I know this call isn't about student loan debt, but that question comes up a lot. What is the education quality associated with individuals that are now, facing their student loan payments? How about that loan repayment process and their ability to pay back those financial obligations? Sometimes circles back to what the accreditor was doing in the first place in the review of that institution or program. And so very close attention is paid to these rules, not just by DEAC, but by any accreditor that is going through that process with the Department of Education.
Excellent. And I really appreciate you helping to kind of surface some of the like macro level things that are happening around accreditation for
Right.
accreditors. And that is something that then trickles down to the institutions, to the programs, and thinking about the different gatekeepers that are at that higher level, including
That's
you
right.
guys, but that you also have oversight by these other organizations as
That's
well.
right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Excellent.
It's called the triad, Amy, in government parlance. Accreditors work with state organizations and the Department of Education to kind of build a portfolio of review of these institutions based on the different roles that these organizations play in quality oversight and quality assurance, and also consumer protection.
Excellent. So I know we wanted to speak a little bit about NC Sarah. You're also on their
Yeah.
board. And I think that they are, from my perspective, incredibly misunderstood by institutions in many ways. And so, we're getting more familiar with it, but I thought it would be an excellent opportunity to ask you to kind of talk about NC Sarah and their role. And I really honestly was unaware of some of the requirements around state authorization that also brings in the DEAC role sometimes. And so I thought it would be great for you to talk to our listeners a little bit about that.
So NC Sarah stands for the National Council for State Authorization Reciprocity Agreements. Your listeners may be wondering, why is there a reciprocity agreement organization in the United States? It's here to help distance education institutions operate effectively outside the state in which they are physically located. We ended up with NC SARA going all the way back to negotiated rulemaking that followed the 2008 Higher Education Act reauthorization. And in that reauthorization process and the subsequent rulemaking, questions were being raised about distance education institutions enrolling students outside of the state where they had physical presence, and what kind of consumer protection was necessary, because the student living in Ohio who is attending a university in Florida may have difficulty, may need some resources within that state. How is that addressed across state boundaries? And so state authorization for distance education was crafted in language in 2010 to start. We have been working on that language ever since to build regulations around reciprocity agreement. So now for distance education in any institution, whether it's fully online or a residential in-person campus setting, has to have approval to operate their distance education programs outside of their state. They can do that in one of two ways. They can apply for approval in each state individually, which can be extremely time-consuming and burdensome. Or they can apply to NC SARA for reciprocity with 49 states that are a part of that agreement. Being a member in NC SARA as a distance education institution means that you can enroll students in any state that is part of this agreement. Currently, California is not part of NC SARA. So distance education institutions in California have to apply to every state where they enroll students. And any institution that enrolls students from California has to make sure that they have proper authorization from California. And this was really intended to build an infrastructure around consumer protection to make sure that there was good communication and collaboration amongst states for any students that needed help or had a complaint or had an issue or a concern. And there are still questions being raised about SARA's effectiveness in that role of consumer protection. And so we're working through processes that can strengthen disclosures to students about the program outcomes, disclosures to students if they're enrolling in a program that results in a licensure status in order to practice in a profession, and also making sure students fully understand the educational policies and procedures for filing a complaint, requesting student services, understanding about their loan. Any kind of administrative process or complaint procedure, is built around the NC SARA process and reciprocity among the states. I will tell you, Amy, there is a lot more detail to that, especially with regard to the regional compacts and their involvement in NC SARA and their portal agency process across these states to get institutions into it. I just really encapsulated what NC SARA is about, but it is a critically important feature for distance education now. And it's something 10 years ago that we really didn't have in place. It represents a grassroots institution level effort to develop a process to address a regulatory framework.
Excellent. Your two things that you raised there that, again, this is a very complicated topic, as you said. And you mentioned regional compacts. Can you explain what that is?
So there are 4 regional compacts, not to be confused with regional accreditation. So the compacts are organized by geography. There's the Western Commission, which is the Western states, called WICHE. There's SREB in the South. There's MEC, which is kind of in the middle states, and then there's New England. So there's these 4 regional compacts. These compacts are their own organizations of the states, and they have been instrumental in working with states to establish reciprocity across these boundaries. So the regional compacts have been very important partners to this process of state authorization, and they've been kind of working as pioneers, if you will, into building this infrastructure and also championing being champions for student protection. because we want to make sure that every possible outlet is available to students that is clear for information they may need about their program of study online.
Yeah, excellent. And so we're going to talk a little bit about students and parents, and you're talking about consumer protection, things like that. But all of these different bodies that we've raised today, I mean, there's so many different folks that are players in the space of not just distance education, but higher education in general. And in my experience, these folks are all thinking really, really hard about what is best for students. How do we make sure that students are, in the end, getting what they've paid for, that they're achieving the outcomes from higher education that they really were seeking to begin with. But it's very complicated, and there's so many layers. So you're thinking about the federal level, the state level, even, in a small geography, being in Missouri, Iowa, Midwest, Illinois, like think about a student just driving across state lines, right? That raises all kinds of questions. But now you're talking about students across the entire nation having access, which is wonderful, to programs that they may not have access nearby to home. But I mean, the complication of trying to serve students across 49 states plus 50 in California, and being sure that we're keeping promises to those students and parents. I mean, oh my goodness. I mean, I just appreciate so much all the smart folks who are working on this for us. But I would be very interested from your perspective of, where are we making progress? Right? Where are we doing really good for students and for other stakeholders like parents and employers? And where are we still falling short? What do we need to be focused on?
Amy, I mentioned earlier that I think distance education is in a real sweet spot for the working professional. Those students already have, terrific self-motivation skills to get through an online program. I would tell you that, this test of student readiness to be in an online program really goes beyond just access. I mean, we can have access everywhere, but if there isn't kind of an aptitude by that learner and an attitude uh, of a commitment to online learning, it's not going to be successful for that student. And I would say in my observations of this work, and I've been at DEAC almost 10 years now, I found that the first time learner in post-secondary, whether it's a certificate diploma or entry level into an associate's degree, that learner in their first post-secondary experience needs a lot of attention, a lot of service, a lot of counseling and advising, a lot of monitoring, and even hand-holding. And if an institution doesn't have that kind of service culture embedded within their architecture for student services, they're going to run into some outcomes difficulties. And so I think, where the learner is in terms of their readiness, their attitude, and their aptitude to be successful in distance education is an important part of that enrollment decision. I wish there were ways in our financial aid model to provide allowances for this kind of testing. For institutions that are not in financial aid, I'll give you an example of University of the People. So this is a tuition-free institution offering associate's, bachelor's, and master's degrees. There are some costs associated with proctored exams, but they're not in the financial aid program. They take no dollars from student lending at all. Because of that, they're able to do some unique kind of testing and weaning out of students that can be successful in their programs. They can offer 3 free courses just to test whether that aptitude, that attitude, that ability is there to be successful before they go any further and before they take any money, right? And so, looking at how we can have these strategies in place for all learners, I think is a real policy challenge in the United States, because so many of our learners, especially those that don't have some of the resource advantages that others have, when they make a financial commitment to a student loan, it is for that entire program. All right. And so if we could develop better models around assessing aptitude, and abilities of online learners that are coming into this for the first time, I think we could go a long way in securing better outcomes at the end of the online learning program.
Excellent. And I had not even thought of that in this context, but it makes so much sense. And it gets back to one of those things where again, we want to provide students with the opportunity to achieve the
Hmm.
outcomes. But again,
Right.
it's still something that no matter what you do, some students are just, as you said, they're not ready. This isn't the right way. And maybe it's not the right program.
Hmm.
And so we spent so much time in higher ed being focused on access, right? Being able
Right.
to, if
Right.
you want to do it, you can, right? Without kind of saying, you can, but you're not ready. That's a hard
Right.
conversation to have with
Right.
somebody, and a different
Sure it is.
resource commitment to get ready and those kind of things. Go ahead.
Mhm. Exactly, Amy. And, a hard sell for an uncertain learner is not okay, right? And we've seen
Mm-hmm.
so many unfortunate practices across all sectors, all right,
Mm-hmm.
um, that have gotten people into lending, into these online programs, and they're just not ready for it. And so we need to do better as a community at looking at these issues and how we can do a better job of assessing learner readiness for distance education.
Excellent. And so I'll put you on the spot a little bit. Is this
Uh-oh.
something that you are addressing as a part of your standards for accreditation?
We do have standards that call for, the student and, their profile, their learner profile, and in terms of their readiness to come into distance education, because most DEAC institutions are not in the federal loan programs. They operate with a different kind of scale because they can take on some of these creative approaches to evaluating how students are going to be successful in their programs. Most of our institutions are engaged with professionals who are, working towards graduate programs or another bachelor degree, just for professional fulfillment requirements. We don't have a whole lot of activity in that first-time learner category, but where we do, we really look closely at how are you evaluating that student. How are you communicating to the student what their obligations are going to be as a learner, and not just their learning requirements, but their financial obligations as well. And this is just one piece of what accreditation does, in addition to all of the other quality assurance functions that it carries out.
Excellent. And that's one of the things I think has surfaced as I've been speaking to other folks is that accreditation standards and accreditation processes become a vehicle for disseminating best practices. And so that's, literally the standard is something that's being established as a norm. Like, this is something that you really, in order to be an excellent program or institution that is accredited by our organization, we have established these are best practices that you need to meet at a certain level in order for us to give you our stamp of approval. I would love to hear a little bit from you about how you develop standards, what process you
Sure.
use to go through, if you're going to change or add standards.
Right, right. Well, we are looking at our standards all the time. We get feedback from our evaluators after every institution assessment, to tell us, how did this assessment go? What feedback do you have about our standards? What do you think needs reviewed, modernized, done away with? And so we go through a constant exercise of collecting data about how our standards are effective in the field. We also have conversations at the board level about the standards. Pretty much at every meeting, it comes up about this standard. Is it effective? Is it meaningful? Is it still relevant? Also, accreditors on a periodic basis, as a recognition feature with the Department of Education, have to go through a systematic process of evaluating their standards. And it's the standards as a whole. All of the standards working together. Is this still effective in practice and quality assurance? And that needs to involve constituencies. It should involve institution input, members of the public, members of the regulatory community, students, by the way, graduates. And so just developing tools that can gather data, whether it's survey instrument or we've convened focus groups of students and graduates to gather that kind of data. And then it builds kind of a program of review. And so certain standards rise to the top in terms of need for revision and content. I'll tell you one standard that we've developed quite a bit over the last couple of years is the library resources standard. because it's really not just about books in the library anymore. It's about these vast databases of academic journals and peer-reviewed material that are available in these systems such as JSTOR, for example. And library science has really evolved in terms of electronic and digital materials and media that are so effective in supporting learning along the way in distance ed. So when you have a faculty member with terrific instructional design supporting them and media resources, a librarian that has really taken a deep dive into developing their own proficiency in electronic media and digital resources, it can be a very fulfilling learning experience for the student when all of that comes together. And that's what accreditation standards have to recognize. That involved training with our educational evaluators, our chairs, and our board when we made some shifts to how we evaluate the library. It's not about number of volumes and who published them, right? It's about the quality of those materials, the peer-reviewed aspect of it, and their digital footprint.
Excellent example, and so timely, as folks made this kind of emergency shift, over the last few years, then you heard a lot about that, suddenly I need to figure out how to make this rich resources available to students, where they are. And
that's right.
Yeah,
that's right. We are past that emergency remote shift.
Yeah.
All right, we are long past that. We should be engaged in meaningful instructional design with appropriate resources, which tools that engage our students, going beyond our comfort with video conferencing. Everybody went to video conferencing and Zoom in early 2020. We've got to really move past that because there's so many wonderful technology resources out there to engage students.
Excellent. I love the way that you all are really pushing forward in innovation and thinking very deeply about learning and technologies to enhance the learning and teaching environments. You're doing some really interesting things, and I imagine we could talk about that. Maybe that's another podcast episode we could talk about.
I would be glad to. It's fun to have these conversations and to raise awareness about what's going on behind the scenes in distance education right now.
Excellent. So kind of to take things to a broader level a little bit, I like to ask folks, where our podcast is all about accreditation conversations, and to ask you to do a little bit of future scoping, right? Where do you see accreditation heading in the next few years?
I think accreditation is going to have to answer for accountability for student learning and outcomes. I think accreditation is going to have to answer for student loans and loan repayment. It's just the trajectory of where things are heading politically and in the policy landscape. Accreditors are going to start to reach outside some of the traditional boundaries as well. You had brought up some rule changes. In 2020, the Department of Education took away the category of regional accreditor and national accreditor and kind of built an architecture around the term institutional accreditor. How those terms are being implemented is a whole other conversation, but it certainly has made room for the regional accreditors to work outside some of their traditional boundaries, and hopefully national accreditors to be seen as having an equivalent status and process of accreditation to their counterparts. I'd love to see more collaboration across accreditors. I'd love to see more input from students and graduates into their experiences at accredited institutions and how maybe the accreditor might improve their own processes based on those student experiences. Overall, accreditation is kind of at the tip of that spear on accountability, and where accreditors traditionally have been looked at in terms of inputs into their assessment process, it's now really focused squarely on outputs, graduation rates, student success, loan repayment, and career success of graduates.
Interesting. Those are difficult conversations for sure, but I'm just, I know, having spoken to you and your colleagues in this space, I can't think of folks who are better prepared to really tackle these issues for us. I have so much respect for the work that all of you who are leading accreditation organizations and the wonderful people that you work with to do this work because it is incredibly hard and complicated. And I have yet to speak to somebody who I didn't feel like, you know what, the future is in good hands, and it's hard, but you guys will figure it out, with us, with the organizations that are also involved, the institutions. You've talked about all of these players, the institutions, the states, the feds, parents, students. I mean, you're aware of all of these different stakeholders and having the right conversations to get us to a better place, I feel like. So thank you for that.
Well, I thank you for constructive conversations about this
Good.
and how we can all, improve as a collective community.
Excellent. So if somebody else wanted to continue the conversation with you, what would be the best way for them to get a hold of you?
Oh, you can reach me by email, leah.matthews@deac.org is the best way. You can give our office a call. We're located in Washington, D.C. in the Eastern time zone. So it's 202-234-5100. I'm always happy to have continued conversations on this topic. It has been my life's work to develop accreditation procedures that serve and protect students and our communities. So
Excellent.
thanks for letting me talk about it a little bit.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I know that all of our listeners will benefit from everything that we were able to learn today. Sincerely, thank you.
Thank you.
Wow. I don't know about you, but I learned so much from Leah Matthews today. She has a really different perspective on all of this work that we're doing in accreditation in higher education, coming from the background of having worked with CHIA for many years. She has the experience to look at this from the federal level and really see across the entire landscape. And now being with DEAC, she's very involved in what's happening at the state level across every 50 states. So being able to sit and talk with her a little bit about what is occurring not only in accreditation overall in higher education in North America, but also thinking about distance education and something that is evolving very quickly. And there's so much innovation occurring around distance education that it is just fascinating to me to have the opportunity to discuss all of these topics with her today. I hope you learned something. I certainly did. I will also be following up on some of the resources that she shared with us today, talking about enhancing student learning and resources that you can go to really think about enhancing the quality of a distance education program. So I appreciate it that she shared those resources with us today as well. Please keep listening to Accreditation Conversations. This podcast has been a lot of fun for us so far, but it is also only getting started. We have some guests coming up that I know you're going to learn a lot from. I'm having the opportunity to speak with some folks that when I was on campus, I never would have had the opportunity to get in front of. And I hope I'm asking them the questions that you would ask them if you had the opportunity. I encourage you to subscribe using the podcast platform that you enjoy. And we are also on YouTube, so you could use that to listen as well. Please make sure you subscribe and keep listening. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.